In this video, I'm going to talk about using a combinator in Reason. And what we're going to do with a combinator is the closest thing Reason gets to a multitimbral synth. None of the synths are truly multitimbral. Now I know you could say you can set up a multitimbral patch with a sampler. That is true, depending on how you map the samples. But none of the synthesizers are really multitimbral. So if you wanted to create a lead synth, let's say, with 4 subtractors, you'd have to do some fancy routing to get all 4 of those synthesizers set up so that you could trigger them all at once from the sequencer. Remember, in Reason, after we've added a device, we click on its sequencer track to play notes on that device. So a combinator lets us very easily combine instruments in a single rack within the rack, and they call that the combinator. And then when we do that, the combinator will get a track down here on the sequencer. We can highlight it and then play it from our MIDI keyboard, and we'll be triggering any synthesizers or samplers or devices that are inside that combinator. We'll trigger them all at once. So let's go ahead and add the combinator. And there are several ways to do it. I'm going to go here to Utilities, and I'll find Combinator, and I'll just drag it into the rack. So this is what it looks like. It doesn't make any sound, but you can see that I did create, by adding that combinator, I created a sequencer track. So it's showing that it's getting MIDI signal from my MIDI keyboard controller. That's good news. And now let's go ahead and start adding devices to this combinator. Before we add anything, though, let's spin the rack around because I want to show you something. If I were to add a device into this combinator, like let's say I want to add a subtractor, I can drag that subtractor right in here to this rack portion of the combinator, and it will plug itself in to the audio input. And if I add another subtractor to the same spot, just below that one I previously added, you notice it didn't plug itself in. There's only one basic place for it to plug a device in, so that's not going to work very well. I'm going to undo that and undo the previous combinator. And what we'll do to get around that problem of one input and output is the first device we're going to add in our combinator is going to be a mixer. Excuse me. And the mixer we'll find is in this Utilities section. There's a big mixer with 14 inputs and a stereo out. But for this situation, since we're just going to use 4 subtractors to create this mega lead sound, well, hopefully it's mega, I'm going to use this little mixer, line mixer, 6 inputs and 2 outputs. So I'm just going to drag that into the combinator. And we'll flip the rack around again, and you can see that the mixer output plugged in to the combinator input. So now as I add devices, they will plug themselves into this little mixing board. Before I even add my first device, though, I'm going to click on this mixer just to highlight it, and I'm going to add an effects device. And we're going to have a reverb unit that will plug itself into this mixer as an auxiliary send and return. So let's click on Effects, and I'll just look for the RV7000 reverb, and I'll drag that to the rack. And sure enough, it plugged itself in via auxiliary send and returns. So now, when I add my subtractors, I'll be able to send the signal to that reverb. So I can get the same reverb in differing amounts on all of the synths that I'll add to this track. All right, so let's add our subtractors. I'm going to find this first subtractor, and I'll drag it in to the combinator. And I'll do that again. That's 2 combinators. Let's do it one more time. I'll scroll down, and you see each time, rather than dragging this combinator below, or I'm sorry, this subtractor below the combinator, I'm dragging it right into this little empty rack space at the bottom of the combinator rack. Remember again, the combinator sort of looks like an equipment rack within the main Reason equipment rack. So far, I've got 3 combinators added in, and if I was not sure of that, I can look on my mixer. They're all plugged in. Let's add one more. Scroll down a bit so we can see that empty space, and I'll drag one more combinator, one more subtractor into that combinator. All right. So now when I play my MIDI keyboard, I'm hearing all 4 subtractors at once. Now it's not very impressive yet because they're all playing exactly the same patch, the default bass guitar patch. I've selected some patches that I want to use, so let's start adding those into each of these subtractors. For subtractor 1, I'm going to click on the little patch browser, and I'll go into the monosynth folder, and I'm going to look for one called All Square. And I'll just double click that to add it to the first subtractor. Already sounds a little different. Scroll down to the second synth, and here I'm going to add one called Singing Synth. Again, it's in the monosynths folder. So I'll click on subtractor 2's patch browser, monosynth, and I'll scroll down to find the patch called Singing Synth. There it is, and I'll just double click it. You can also click and drag. Remember, with the new Reason browser, you can just click on a patch and drag it in to add that. Maybe I'll show that in a minute. But this third one, I'm going to use Funk Lead. And then the last, I'll use Punchy PWM, which stands for Pulse Width Modulation. It's called, the patch again is called Punchy PWM Lead. There it is. All right. So now our patch is starting to sound a little more interesting. Let's close the browser for now, and we'll see what we can do with the mixer to maybe spice things up even more. One thing I want to do is check all of my patches. Make sure they're all monophonic. I'm going to check the polyphony of all of them. And sure enough, they're all mono patches. I want to also add a little bit of portamento on each of these synths. So I'm going to check the portamento settings. Portamento, again, is called glide on a Moog synth. It allows the pitch, depending on how you play it, to slide from one pitch to the next. So I'm set on legato, and I've got I'm going to increase that up to, let's say, 58, 60, somewhere in that range. Okay, 59, close enough. 57, doesn't matter. As long as we're in that neighborhood. So again, second synth, legato, and I'm 58 there. I'll leave that one alone. The third synth, let's change that one to legato and increase it up to about 58-ish, 60-ish. Just in the neighborhood is good. It doesn't have to be exact. And then finally, the last synth, we'll make that legato and increase it to 58 or so. All right. So now that I've set it at legato, when I play legato, the synths will slide from note to note. That's portamento. If I play staccato, so legato, there is glide or portamento. Staccato, no glide. There you go. Okay, now back to the mixer. Let's pan these separately. So I'm just going to pan one, which is all square, hard, fairly hard left. And then I'll take Singing Synth in channel 2 and pan it a little bit left. And I'll pan Funk Lead, which is number 3, a little bit to the right. And finally, Punchy Pulse Width Modulation Lead even farther to the right. Good. It's starting to sound a little more interesting. And you could adjust the levels if you didn't like, if you thought one synth was too loud in relation to the others, you can adjust the levels here. You can also solo synths if you like. Or mute them while you're working on them. Finally, what I'm going to do here is add some of this reverb right now. We don't hear the reverb yet. Remember, it's set up as an aux send, so I can just dial it in. I'll just play notes and dial in some reverb. Okay, let's give it a name. I'm going to call this Mike's Big Lead. So I'll just click right on this Combinator. Sorry, I don't know why I was clicking on that patch browser. That was dumb. I'll click right on the name of the Combinator and I'll type in So I've named the Combinator, and then I can save that as a Combinator patch if I like. If I think I might want to use this one again, I can save it as a Combinator patch. What I've done right now is just change the name of the device, which changed the name in the sequencer track. If I decided, yeah, I really like this patch, I might want to use it again, I can save that Combinator patch over here. And then save it. And then if I want to add that to Another Reason song, it'll show up in the patch browser. I should be able to find that in the Combinator patches when I'm looking for them. All right, so that's it for this tutorial. In the next step, we'll take a look at using some of these rotary knobs and buttons and how to program them on this section, this programmer section of the Combinator. That's it for now.